Are you pleased that Daniel Andrews seems to be relaxing some laws, even if he's not doing as much as other states?
Well, good afternoon, Chris, and great to be with you. I think there has been a collective sigh of relief across the state of Victoria following the announcement today. But that said, there has been a bit of disappointment that Daniel Andrews has been slow out of the blocks on easing restrictions. And certainly a couple of days ago, Chris, the message that he sent, which is my way or the highway, and then there came reports, of course, that Daniel Andrews was nothing more than being power hungry, did not resonate well. And I am pleased that there has been the easing of restrictions announced today, albeit, of course, we still have no real plan in relation to schools, which is a concern to all parents across Victoria, including me.
Well, I'll come to schools in a moment, but generally, do you still think that Victoria is going too slowly? Is there any rationale for Victoria not at least matching what's happening in New South Wales, for instance?
I certainly think there is a feeling in the community, and wherever I've been, and last weekend I was at the Warm Ponds Shopping Centre and you could barely get apart. So I think certainly Victorians have looked at what has happened in other states, Chris, and said, you know what, we're being taken for a bit of a ride here. We're so proud, and let me say, we are so proud of what Australians have done in flattening the curve. There's now a very, very small number of new cases each day, and frankly, the National Cabinet process has worked very effectively with the Prime Minister and all state and territory premiers and First Ministers. But I think in the last week, there has been growing resentment towards Daniel Andrews insofar as the slowness in Victoria. And let's not forget, there are so many businesses that are bleeding, that desperately want to get back to work. Victorians want to get back to work. Kids want to go to school. Parents want their children at school. And we want to get on with opening up the economy. The Prime Minister announced a very strong framework on Friday. And there is some relief that Premier Andrews has made the announcement today, albeit I don't think it's enough and certainly not quick enough.
Well, let's talk about schools then and have a look at what Daniel Andrews had to say about schools today.
We now believe that a gradual, staged return to face-to-face learning is safe, cautious and appropriate given the testing we've done and the circumstances we face. Today's not the day to announce the details, but that'll be done soon.
As you say, Sarah Henderson, no details in this, but, you know, this is so frustrating. So saying they can move forward on schools from where they were, which was no school attendances essentially during second term, still no details. And this is immensely frustrating for me. I think all of the states, all of the eastern states, have terribly mismanaged this throughout because there's never been a medical justification for shunning kids from school.
Well, I think what's important to emphasise, Chris, is that in WA and South Australia, schools effectively never closed. But certainly in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, there was a much harder line taken, albeit in Victoria, the road back to getting kids back in the classroom has been very slow. I was pleased to see that there is now a recognition by Premier Andrews that keeping children at home and students at home through until the end of term 2 is not the way to go. But there is also an incredible amount of frustration that there is still no plan in Victoria. I really do think that it's imperative that Victoria announces a strong plan and very, very quickly. This is doing enormous damage. I won't talk about my own son, and he's 14 and of course doing remote learning. But I know that for so many children, they are really struggling. Of course, there are very significant mental health issues with keeping kids in front of a computer, not in the classroom, not in the schoolyard. And I am, as I say, pleased that we've made some progress in Victoria, but it's not enough. And we need to see that plan, Chris, very, very quickly.
Do you have any sense of what's driving Daniel Andrews here? We all know that you don't want to let this pandemic break out. You don't want to lose control of the situation, but it's clearly under control now. We're immensely better prepared than we were 3 months ago. He seems not to be so concerned about the jobs that are being destroyed, the businesses that are effectively waiting to see whether they can be resuscitated. I mean, there's a real urgency about getting things going again, and he's very happy at this stage to drag behind the rest of the country.
Well, Chris, I do want to reiterate that the National Cabinet process has worked very well, and I think the community at large has really embraced that. But certainly there has been growing concern about the slowness in Victoria under Daniel Andrews, and particularly in relation to schools.
Was Dan Tehan right? So was Dan Tehan right, the Federal Education Minister, when he called out Daniel Andrews?
Look, I think what Dan was doing was reflecting a frustration amongst many communities, many school groups, many parents, and that frustration is growing even more in the last week. And I think...
But was he right? But was he right to say that the Premier was showing a lack of leadership on the schools front?
Look, I'm not going to be drawn on that. Obviously, Dan made some clarifying comments in relation to what he said, and I have to say, and I reiterate this, that the National Cabinet process has worked very effectively, led by the Prime Minister, and I think there is a great deal of confidence in our government as to the way in which we've handled this from the very beginning. And I'm so proud of Scott Morrison and the leadership team, Josh Frydenberg and Greg Hunt and everyone else, of course. But I think it really has gone off the rails a little bit in Victoria, and now what I'm calling for is a plan for children to go back to school in Victoria. I'm pleased that it's now going to be brought forward, but we do need to see that plan very, very quickly.
Right, just on another issue, Sarah, I want to ask you about these latest threats from China regarding tariffs and our grain exports to China. Do you believe that they're related to the coronavirus issue and the fact that Australia's been calling for a COVID-19 investigation?
Well, Chris, the Prime Minister made it clear today that this has been a dispute that has been ongoing for some 18 months. So no, this is not related. But certainly a number of weeks ago, China made some overtures that it may impose economic coercion threats, if you like. And it is very regrettable that we have now seen the barley trade to China put at peril. It's $1 billion trade. For our farmers, it's incredibly important. And to be imposing an 80% tariff is absolutely shocking for our trade here in Australia. And I have to say it is very, very regrettable. And let me also make the point, Chris, I heard Richard Marles, the Shadow Defence Minister and the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party, speaking about this. And he just said, oh, well, this was regrettable. I am really disappointed that the Labor Party is not prepared to call out China when China does not act appropriately, whether it's in not revealing details about the coronavirus cause, whether it's this trade dispute, whether it's the threats of economic coercion. And of course, I think this is underpinned by the fact that Daniel Andrews has entered into a very improper deal, the Belt and Road Initiative between China and Victoria. No one is willing to call out Labor on this absolutely appalling deal. And we now see Labor sort of shirking in the shadows, not prepared to stand up for our farmers, for our Victorian jobs.
Right, we'll come back to that. We will come back to that Belt and Road issue again, Sarah Henderson. We are out of time, though. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to talk to you as always, Chris.
Sarah Henderson there, formerly the member for Corangamite, now a Liberal senator.